Have you ever prayed with all your heart and heard nothing back? You asked. You waited. You believed. But heaven felt quiet. No answer. No sign. No change. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And the prayer that once came easily, slowly became heavier to say. Because somewhere inside the silence, a question begins to grow. God, are you even listening? You still show up to church. You still open your Bible. You still whisper the same prayer before you sleep. But deep down, you wonder, did my prayer reach heaven? Or did it fall back to the ground unheard? You see other people receiving blessings, doors opening, miracles happening, yet your situation remains the same. The illness is still there. The bills are still waiting. The relationship is still broken. The opportunity never came. And heaven remains quiet. No voice. No sign. No sudden change. Just silence. And silence can be one of the hardest experiences in a believer's life. Because when God speaks, direction comes. When God moves, doors open. When God answers, faith becomes easy. But when God is silent, faith becomes a battle. You begin to replay your prayers in your mind. Did I say the wrong words? Did I miss something God wanted from me? Is there something in my life that caused heaven to close? You search your heart. You ask forgiveness again and again. You try praying longer. You try fasting harder. You try believing stronger. But the silence remains. And slowly, doubt tries to step in. Not loud doubt. Quiet doubt. The kind that whispers late at night. Maybe God forgot about you. Maybe your situation is different. Maybe this prayer will never be answered. But before that thought grows any further, there is something every believer must understand. The silence of God has never meant the absence of God. In fact, some of the most powerful moments in Scripture happened during seasons when heaven seemed quiet. Think about it. There was a time when a man named Job cried out to God and heard nothing. There was a young dreamer named Joseph who believed God had a purpose for his life, yet he spent years in a prison cell wondering how the promise would ever happen. There were generations who waited for the coming of the Messiah, while heaven remained silent for hundreds of years. And yet, in every one of those moments, God was still working, quietly, carefully, perfectly, because sometimes when God is silent, He is preparing something greater than what we asked for. Sometimes the silence is not rejection. Sometimes the silence is preparation. Preparation inside you. Preparation around you. Preparation ahead of you. Because the truth is, if God answered every prayer immediately, we would see the miracle. But we would miss the transformation. And God cares just as much about who you become as He does about what you receive. So tonight, if you are in a season where heaven feels quiet, if you have been praying and waiting, if you have asked the same question again and again, God, are you listening? Then listen carefully to this truth. God's silence is never empty. God's silence is never careless. And God's silence is never the end of your story. Because sometimes, the greatest evidence that God is working is the moment when you cannot see or hear Him at all. And when you understand this, silence stops feeling like abandonment and begins to feel like expectation. Millions of believers pray every single day. In quiet bedrooms, in hospital waiting rooms, in cars before work, in churches filled with worship. They pray with hope. They ask for healing. A mother kneels beside her child's bed asking God to restore a body that doctors say is failing. A father whispers a prayer late at night, asking God to provide when the bills on the table keep growing. A young man asks for direction, wondering which path will lead to the purpose God placed inside him. A woman cries out for restoration in a relationship that once brought joy but now feels broken. Every prayer carries the same expectation, that God hears, that God cares, that God will respond. But sometimes, days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, and months slowly stretch into years. Yet the situation remains unchanged. The diagnosis is still there. The financial pressure has not lifted. The door you hoped would open remains closed. The answer you expected never arrives. And slowly, faith begins to feel heavier than it once did. Because believing in God is easy when prayers are answered quickly. When miracles happen in front of your eyes. When blessings arrive exactly when you hoped they would. But faith becomes a different experience when heaven feels quiet. When you keep praying the same prayer, and the silence continues. Many believers never talk about this struggle. They sit in church smiling. They sing worship songs with everyone else. They say, "God is good," with confidence. But deep inside, there is a quiet question they rarely speak out loud. Why does it feel like God is silent in my life? It is a question that has echoed through the hearts of believers for thousands of years. And it is not a question born from weak faith. It is a question born from honest faith. Because the truth is, some of the greatest men and women in the Bible stood in the exact same place. They believed in God. They trusted His promises. They prayed with sincerity. And yet, there were moments when heaven felt quiet. Moments when they waited longer than they expected. Moments when they could not see what God was doing. Moments when the silence stretched longer than their understanding. This struggle is not new. It did not begin with you. It did not begin with me. It has been part of the journey of faith since the beginning. There were prophets who cried out for God to speak. Kings who waited for direction. Servants of God who held on to promises they could not yet see fulfilled. And in those seasons, their greatest test was not whether God had power. Their greatest test was whether they would continue trusting God even when they could not hear Him. Because silence tests faith in a way that immediate answers never can. When answers come quickly, belief feels natural. But when answers delay, faith must grow deeper, stronger, more rooted than emotion. And this is where many believers stand today. Praying, waiting, hoping, holding on to God's promises with one hand, while wrestling with the silence with the other. But the story of Scripture reveals something powerful. Silence has never been the end of God's work. Very often, it has been the beginning of something far greater than anyone expected. There was once a man who lost everything. His children gone. His wealth vanished. His health shattered. One tragedy after another came crashing into his life, until the man who once had everything now had nothing. This man was named Job. Job was known as righteous, upright, a man who feared God and turned away from evil. He was faithful in ways most of us can only imagine. And yet, in the face of his suffering, he experienced something every believer dreads: the silence of God. He prayed. He cried out. He begged for answers. He pleaded for mercy. But for a long time, God said nothing. No voice. No sign. No comfort. Imagine that for a moment. Losing everything you love, everything you worked for, everything that defined your life, and hearing only silence from heaven. Imagine the nights Job spent staring at the ceiling, tears staining his pillow, wondering if God had abandoned him. Imagine the friends who came to console him, only to give answers that fell short, offering words that could not fill the emptiness inside his heart. Imagine the questions swirling in Job's mind. Why is this happening? Where is God in all of this? Did I do something to deserve this? These are questions that echo in the hearts of believers today. Questions whispered in the quiet of the night. Questions prayed over again and again, often without any answer. And yet, Job's story does not end in despair. But for now, let us linger in the tension. Let us feel the weight of silence, the heaviness of unanswered prayers. Job's silence was not punishment. It was not the end of God's plan. It was the space where faith was tested, where endurance was built, where character was refined. Notice this: Job did not curse God. He did not turn away completely. He struggled. He questioned. He wrestled with pain, and yet he clung to the knowledge of God's presence, even when he could not feel it. This is the critical lesson. The silence of God does not equal absence. It does not mean He has stopped working. It does not mean your prayers have fallen on deaf ears. The silence is heavy. It is real. It is painful. But it is also purposeful. Job's story reminds us that God often allows silence to accomplish something far greater than immediate comfort. To teach patience. To deepen trust. To prepare for a testimony that will inspire generations. Imagine losing everything, and still holding on to God. Imagine praying through nights without answers, and still believing. This was Job, a man whose faith would eventually rise from the ashes of suffering, stronger than ever. And if you are in a season of silence tonight, if your prayers have not yet been answered, if heaven feels distant, take heart, because just as Job's story did not end in silence, yours will not either. The God who listens, the God who sees, the God who never forgets, He is still at work even when you cannot see it. And in the quiet, He is shaping your faith, refining your heart, and preparing a breakthrough that only He can orchestrate. The silence is heavy, the struggle is real, but the promise is sure. Job's life teaches us this truth. Sometimes the waiting, the suffering, and the unanswered prayers are the very tools God uses to bring about the greatest victory of your life. Faith through silence is not wasted. Trust through trials is not ignored. Hope through despair is never misplaced. And as we continue, we will see, even when God is silent, He is always working behind the scenes. While Job could not see it, while his heart ached and his prayers seemed unanswered, something far bigger was happening. His faith, though battered, was being refined like gold in the fire. His endurance, though tested, was being formed like a muscle growing stronger under pressure. His story, though filled with pain, was being written in a way that would later inspire millions, throughout generations, across centuries. God was working even while silent. And here is the first truth every believer must understand. Silence is not the absence of God. Silence is the presence of purpose. You see, when God chooses to remain quiet, He is still moving. He is still orchestrating events, shaping circumstances, and aligning hearts, sometimes in ways we cannot yet comprehend. Consider this: Job's loss, his grief, his suffering, these were not random tragedies. They were a part of a divine tapestry, a plan that stretched beyond his understanding. The silence you feel today may feel heavy, unbearable even. But in that silence, God is strengthening your faith in ways comfort never could, teaching patience in ways immediate answers never would, preparing you for a testimony that will encourage others when you finally emerge from the trial. Many of us want God to act immediately. We want instant answers, instant healing, instant breakthrough. But God's timing is different. His methods are higher than ours. His purposes are deeper than what we can see. Job's story shows us that waiting is not wasted. The waiting season is not empty. The quiet moments are not meaningless. The unanswered prayers are not ignored. God was shaping Job's character, fortifying his heart, and preparing him to receive restoration greater than his initial loss. And that, beloved, is what He is doing in your silence too. Your unanswered prayer is not a failure. Your delayed breakthrough is not a denial. Your quiet season is not abandonment. God is working behind the scenes, in ways invisible to the human eye, orchestrating a plan that is bigger than your understanding. Faith through silence is a refining fire. Endurance through hardship is a foundation for testimony. Trust in God's timing is the proof that our hearts belong to Him. So tonight, if you are waiting, if you feel unheard, if heaven seems quiet, remember Job. He prayed. He waited. He wrestled. He endured. And God's work in him did not stop because of silence. God's work in you does not stop because of silence. The first truth is clear: God is always working, even when He is silent. And when you finally understand this truth, silence stops being a burden. It stops being a season of doubt. And it becomes a season of preparation, a season of growth, and a season where God's plan is quietly unfolding for your good. The question is, will you trust Him in the silence? Will you hold on to faith even when you cannot see? Because the moment you do, you step into a deeper relationship with God, one that is tested, proven, and unshakable. The silence is heavy, but the work being done is eternal. The suffering is real, but the purpose being fulfilled is divine. The pain is present, but the glory yet to come will far outweigh it all. Another man in the Bible experienced years of silence from God. His name was Joseph. Joseph was a young man full of dreams, visions, and the kind of hope that could light up a room. God had given him dreams that foretold a future of purpose, of leadership, of greatness. But before that purpose could unfold, the path was strewn with betrayal, injustice, and silence. He was betrayed by his own brothers, the very people he loved most. The ones he trusted, the ones he shared his childhood with. They hated his dreams. They hated his faith. They hated the favor God had placed on him. So they sold him into slavery. He was taken far from home, stripped of family, comfort, and security. He became property in a foreign land. And still, Joseph held on to faith. But God's voice seemed distant. Even there, injustice followed. He was falsely accused of a crime he did not commit, thrown into prison, locked behind walls he did not deserve. And there, in that dark, lonely cell, the silence pressed down on him. Day after day, week after week, month after month. No sign of the dreams God had given him. No hint of the destiny God had promised. No opening of the doors he had envisioned. Where was God during those years? This is the question that haunts every believer who prays and waits. Joseph could have given up. He could have doubted. He could have chosen bitterness, anger, or despair. And yet, he did not. Even in prison, he remained faithful. Even in silence, he held on to hope. Even when the world seemed against him, he continued to trust the God who had placed dreams in his heart. Think about it, years passed in darkness. Years passed behind bars. And yet the dreams remained. The vision never left him. The silence was long. The waiting was painful. The injustice was real. And the question every believer asks in their quiet moments. Joseph asked it too. God, are you still with me? God, do you see what I'm enduring? God, will you ever bring my dreams to pass? Beloved, Joseph's story reminds us that silence can last for years. Not days. Not weeks. Sometimes years. And yet, the length of silence does not determine the power of God. The delay does not cancel the promise. The injustice does not erase the destiny. God was working in Joseph's life, quietly, invisibly, behind the scenes. He was shaping Joseph's character. He was preparing Joseph for leadership. He was teaching Joseph patience, wisdom, and integrity. God's hand was never absent. His voice may have been quiet, but his plan was still unfolding. Joseph's story asks each of us tonight, if God seems silent in your life, if the prison of your circumstance feels long, if the dreams he placed in your heart have not yet arrived, will you trust him anyway? Will you hold on when the world says, give up? Because Joseph's story proves this. God's silence is not his absence. God's delay is not denial. God's timing is always perfect. And when the time finally came, when Joseph stepped out of that prison, when the dreams were fulfilled beyond his imagination, he would see that every moment of silence, every trial, every betrayal, had been a necessary step toward his destiny. The question tonight for every believer is simple. Are you willing to trust God through the long silence, knowing that he is still working, even when you cannot see it? Because the story of Joseph shows us, the longer the silence, the greater the testimony. While Joseph languished in prison, God was quietly at work. Not in ways Joseph could see. Not in ways the world could notice. God was preparing him for something far greater than Joseph himself imagined. Leadership, wisdom, influence. A character molded to govern with discernment, patience, and integrity. Every day in that prison, every hardship, every betrayal, every moment of waiting was shaping Joseph for a destiny beyond his dreams. Think about it. A young man who had been rejected by his family, falsely accused, forgotten in prison, would one day rise to power. One day, he would stand before a pharaoh and hold the keys to an entire nation's survival. Years later, Joseph would not only save Egypt, he would save the nations surrounding it from famine. He would provide for the very brothers who betrayed him. And he would see the hand of God in every step of his journey. The silence Joseph endured was not punishment. It was preparation. Beloved, here is the second truth for every believer. God's silence is often his preparation. It is in the quiet seasons that God builds strength, wisdom, and endurance. It is in the waiting periods that God forms the character needed for the next level. It is in the unseen moments that God aligns the circumstances, the people, and the opportunities that will later reveal His glory. How many of us would try to rush ahead if God answered every prayer immediately? How many of us would fail the tests if we were given the reward too soon? Joseph's life reminds us that silence is not a sign of failure. It is not a signal that God has forgotten. It is not a gap in His plan. It is the very moment when God is working the most, behind the scenes, unseen, molding your heart and preparing your life for what is ahead. So tonight, if you are in a season of silence, if your prayers have not been answered yet, if your dreams seem delayed, remember Joseph. Remember Job. Remember that God is at work. The silence you feel is not empty. The waiting you endure is not wasted. The struggle you face is not without purpose. The third truth tonight is this: the hidden work of God is the most powerful work of all. Because the preparation done in silence, the lessons learned in waiting, the character built in hardship, will one day position you to receive blessings and breakthroughs far greater than you could have imagined. Your story, like Joseph's, will become a testimony. Your faith, like Job's, will inspire generations. Your breakthrough, like theirs, will prove that God's silence was never absence, it was divine preparation. So do not despise the quiet. Do not despise the waiting. Do not despise the season when heaven feels still. For in that silence, God is working. In that waiting, God is shaping you. In that season, God is preparing you for the glory that is coming. And when the time comes, you will see the beauty of His plan, and the testimony of His faithfulness will shine brighter than any answered prayer you have ever imagined. Maybe you are in that season right now. You prayed for healing, and nothing has changed. You prayed for direction, and the path still seems unclear. You prayed for a miracle, and heaven feels quiet. You've cried out. You have hoped. You have held on. And yet, the silence stretches on. Beloved, I want you to hear this tonight. God may be doing something you cannot see yet. He may be strengthening your faith in ways only hardship can. He may be shaping your character in ways comfort never could. He may be preparing your future in ways you cannot yet imagine. The silence is not His absence. The waiting is not His neglect. The delay is not His rejection. It is a divine appointment in disguise. It is a preparation period for a blessing greater than you have asked for. It is the refining fire that will polish your faith, build your endurance, and ready you for the next step. Think about Joseph. Years of betrayal, imprisonment, and delay. Yet the silence was God's preparation. Think about Job. Loss, grief, unanswered prayers. Yet the silence was God's refining. And the same God, the same faithful God, is working in your life today. So tonight, if you feel unseen, if you feel unheard, if heaven feels still, take courage. Do not give up. Do not lose hope. Do not question the goodness of God. Because silence does not mean abandonment. Silence often means preparation. It is in the quiet moments, the long waits, the unanswered prayers, that God is quietly working. He is building endurance. He is shaping wisdom. He is orchestrating doors that no human hand could open. And when your season of silence ends, you will look back and see every trial, every delay, every unanswered prayer was a step toward a testimony greater than you could have imagined. Hold on to hope. Hold on to faith. Hold on to God. Because the silence is temporary, but the purpose God is building in you is eternal. Remember this tonight: God is never late. God is never absent. And God's silence is never meaningless. It is the preparation for your breakthrough, the shaping for your destiny, the quiet before the glory. And when your time comes, your story will shine, your testimony will inspire, and the world will see the faithfulness of God in a way only your life can reveal. Silence does not mean abandonment. Silence often means preparation. Hold on. God is at work. Your prayer was heard. Every word, every whisper, every desperate plea, God heard it. Your tears were seen. Every drop that fell in silence, God collected it. Every sorrow, every pain, every moment you felt alone, He saw it all. Your faith is not wasted. Every moment you held on, even when the silence pressed down, even when the waiting seemed endless, it was not in vain. Remember Job. God walked with him through suffering, even when he could not hear his voice. Remember Joseph. God lifted him from prison, turning betrayal and injustice into blessing and purpose. The same God who was faithful to them is still faithful to you today. He has not forgotten your dreams. He has not abandoned your prayers. He has not ignored your struggles. Every silent season, every delay, every moment that tested your heart is a part of the divine story He is writing in your life. So hold on just a little longer. Keep the faith just a little stronger. Trust just a little deeper. Because the God who moves in silence, the God who works behind the scenes, the God who orchestrates the impossible, He is at work in you. And the breakthrough, the blessing, the answered prayer, the miracle, it is coming. Your story is far from over. The best is yet to come. Silence is not absence. Waiting is not denial. Faith is never wasted. Your breakthrough is on the way. Your God is faithful. Boys. Now, I want to speak directly to you. If you are in a season where God feels silent, where prayers seem unanswered, where heaven feels far away, I want you to make a declaration tonight. Type in the comments, "I still trust God." Let this be your statement of faith. Let this be your act of courage in the face of silence. Let this be the way you remind yourself and the world that you believe God is still at work, even when you cannot see it. And don't keep this hope to yourself. Share this message with someone tonight who needs encouragement. Someone who feels forgotten. Someone who feels unheard. Someone whose faith is being tested in the quiet. Because this message is not just for you, it is for them too. Remember this final truth. Even when heaven feels quiet, God is never absent. Hold on. Keep believing. Keep praying. Keep trusting. Your story is unfolding. Your breakthrough is coming. Your God is faithful, always.